According to surveys, people say that breaking this commandment is the most serious sin of all. Do not murder. Join us as we continue our series on the 10 Commandments on Family Vision.
Hi, my name is Amy Rienow. Welcome to Family Vision with my parents, Dr. Rob and Amy Rienow, strengthening families through practical, encouraging, and real conversations.
Rob and Amy Rienow here with Visionary Family Ministries. Resurrection Sunday, Easter, coming up this Sunday. We hope you have big plans to celebrate Jesus and His great love for us, His death for our sins, His resurrection from the dead. He's alive and well and coming soon. He loves your family, and we pray that you have a very special day together.
We also want to welcome the Jacks family from Indiana, Doug and Cindy, to the Visionary Family community. They are the parents to Brian and Amy in Virginia. And Brian and Amy just hosted Rob and the boys for hunting this last fall. So we are just thrilled to have Doug and Cindy. And we think it might be the first multi-generational family to join the Visionary Family community. So we are really thankful that they are here. We also want to welcome the Party family from Texas.
Well, we're continuing our series on the 10 Commandments, and this is not a very cheery one, this commandment, do not murder. And maybe it's the one we pay the least attention to because of how remote it is or how few of us have broken it, the letter of the law that is. And next week, we're actually going to talk about how more of us are guilty of breaking this than we think because of Jesus' teaching on anger and hatred, that he says that if you have had anger and hatred towards your brother, that you're guilty of breaking this commandment. But that's next week.
You know, I think first as we talk about this commandment, in the King James Version, the commandment is translated, do not kill. And then other versions translate it, do not murder. So I think a good place to start is simply explaining the commandment a little bit, because sometimes the do not kill has been used in different ways that make people, I think, feel confused about what God was saying when he gave this commandment.
That is a great question. So the Hebrew word that's used here is ratzach, and it specifically refers to premeditated or intentional or criminal killing, what we call murder. It actually leaves a little room, too, for what we might call manslaughter, like negligent homicide.
Yes.
So it's actually not the general Hebrew word for kill, which is harag, which is why modern Bible translations correctly use the term murder instead of kill, because the commandment does not prohibit all killing, like in war or capital punishment.
Or defense.
Or self-defense, right, under the Mosaic
law. So they
law.
are two different Hebrew words, though. So when the Hebrews received it in the commandment, they would have understand it more in terms of murder and manslaughter than this other Hebrew word. That's so helpful to understand.
Yeah, and we're not going to dig into this today, but something to explore with your children on this subject is this concept, what that's called just war theory or just war theology. You could Google that and learn about that, the difference between murder and a just taking of a life in war, that some war is just and justified and some war is not. We'd also point people to Romans 13 on the subject of capital punishment. And I think there's an important jurisdictional issue there where it talks about God giving the government the power of the sword to bring justice to wrongdoers, and the power of the sword means capital punishment. But the key there is that individuals are not given the authority of capital punishment, right? I can't go down the road and arrest someone and execute them.
Right.
That would not be theologically, morally acceptable. But God does give the government the authority to do that.
Well, and even in the giving of the law, we talked about this when we read Joshua last week, but that Moses, there's the whole, the Ten Commandments are given in a much greater law and I think it's interesting that many people don't realize that so much of the law, our law, even in our country, is based on the Mosaic laws, which go very into detail of the difference between manslaughter, the difference between murder. They talk about cities of refuge, meaning that if someone has accidentally killed someone and they're concerned that someone's going to take revenge on them, that the Lord provided a city of refuge for them in order to flee, in the sense that, God's giving clear instructions in all of these areas that actually have been the foundation of many Western cultures' law.
Yeah, one of the scriptures that gives an example of the self-defense principle is actually in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 18. So they're rebuilding the wall, and it says this. It says, "Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon in the other. And each of the builders had a sword strapped at his side while he built." So they didn't carry a sword to wave it at the bad guys. It was to use it to kill, if necessary, those
if someone
who
was coming after them,
would try to attack and kill their families while they're building the wall. And that was a justified killing, and it would not be a violation of the commandment, do not murder. So these are just some of the important worldview issues to teach your kids, and kids ask these questions. They're good questions.
They are.
Right? Is it morally acceptable to kill in war? What about the death penalty? What about killing in self-defense?
And it's also important to understand that Christians have different views on this. And it's really important to respect respect views of other people. I think you should respect everyone's views, whether it's, just not even among Christians. That's helpful to teach your children to try to understand why other people believe the things that they do. But specifically, there are groups of Christians who believe in a total pacifism view that all killing is wrong. And you think very much of the Mennonites, Amish, Quakers. Amish and Quakers are kind of the same group, but they believe in no self-defense, no just war, no death penalty. And that is also because they believe Christians should not take any oath. So that comes from, I think it's in Matthew, but they believe that it's wrong for a Christian to take an oath or to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And that's where that comes from, so that they shouldn't be called upon to use the sword to defend a nation, because they believe also that you shouldn't take an oath. There's a famous movie, if you want to watch, Sergeant York, the story of Sergeant York, and Gary Cooper plays this part of the, he has this views. He doesn't want to go into war, but I think he's required to go in the war, and he ends up saving many people, even though he is determined not to kill anybody. He goes in and he uses his gifts in order to save people.
In the new movie, Hacksaw Ridge.
That's similar,
course.
Very similar,
Now,
yeah.
that is not for young children.
But Sergeant York, you totally can watch. It's Gary Cooper. It's an incredible story.
Well, as we think practically on this, it is, easy to give ourselves a pass on the do not murder commandment. But Jesus does talk about hating our brother as equal to the sin of murder. So we're going to explore that in next week's episode. But as far as our culture's concerned, murder is actually front and center in a cultural conversation, in a cultural moral crisis that we're dealing with, and that is on the whole subject of abortion.
Abortion certainly is a really important political topic of our day, and something that we should be talking about in our homes, and it directly relates to this commandment, do not murder. Now, I have a confession to make. I have always been personally against abortion from the time I was in high school and understood what that practice was. But I will be really honest that when I was pregnant for the first time and working in a school with a lot of kids with disabilities, which I think was just a very tiring job with that pregnancy, and I was so sick and miserable and just felt awful every day. And honestly, for the very first time in my life, I had this flash in my mind that, oh my goodness, I understand why women would consider abortion a way out, because I wanted this baby. There was no way I would ever even consider that. I really wanted this baby. I had a husband who loved and supported me and wanted this baby. And yet I felt so miserable every day. It was hard being pregnant. And this was my first time understanding how hard it is to be pregnant. And I thought, okay, well, what if I was a young woman who had all odds against me? Maybe I didn't even want to be in this situation. Maybe I made a mistake and now I'm pregnant. I have no husband to support me. Maybe my family doesn't even support me. And think of all of those things, and now I feel sick every single day. You all put all that together, it made me have more compassion for women who choose this because the culture says it's totally fine. And it seems like the only way out at the time. And it's a really scary situation. And you need to cast aside, I think a lot of people say, well, they didn't have to be in that situation to begin with. But the reality is we live in a really fallen world, and the messages that young people get, that they're bombarded with all the time. And if you're not raised in a home that's teaching you God's truth, or not teaching you, about sexuality, you could be in this. There's a lot of reasons why people could be in that circumstance. And I just think we need to have a lot more compassion and understanding what a scary place that is for a young woman.
Yeah, you think about the ministry of Jesus being full of grace and full of truth. And sometimes we fail as believers, both in personal ministry, but then also in public ministry dealing with this. Sometimes we're full of grace, but we're short on the truth. Or we're full on the truth, but we're short on grace. And we've got to bring both of those in the Spirit of Christ, both full of grace and full of truth, that there's forgiveness for women and men who've participated in this, like there's forgiveness for any sin, but the need to call abortion what it is, which is the murder of a child, the murder of a baby. And for that language to be a wake-up, like deterrent. It's important to use the words. It's important to use the language, and for that language to drive repentance.
Yeah.
On the podcast a few months ago, we had Dr. Abby Johnson, and she aborted 2 children. And she's now a pro-life champion, but she speaks very forcefully. She says, I murdered 2 of my children.
Right.
And it's through tears she says that,
Yeah.
but she uses the words. Like she allows the true words to carry their weight, and then the full message of grace and mercy through Christ.
That's so important, and there's been such a watering down of words in our culture. And I was just watching a video on social media where it was Charlie Kirk was talking to a student who kept saying, it's not a baby, it's an embryo. And you would want me, and then her response was, you would want me to ruin my college life for, you would rather have me ruin my college life than kill this embryo. And she just couldn't get herself to say that this was a human, that this was a baby. And she was fully deceived into thinking that it's an amazing level of deception that we can tell ourselves that we can be pregnant, but it's not really with a person.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's frightening to.
And in the Christian world, because we've soaked in a pro-abortion culture for so long, we don't even know how much our thought process has been twisted by this. So most of you listening to Family Vision, you'd say you're followers of Jesus, you're Christians. So I would ask you, does a child, let's think about a 5-year-old and let's think about a 5-month-old in the womb. Does a 5-year-old, in your theology, have equal value, worth, and dignity as the 5-month-old in the mom's womb? Almost every Christian would say, yes, I believe that the 5-year-old boy has equal value, worth, and dignity to the 5-month-old boy or girl in the womb. Baby in the womb. 5 months in utero.
5 months in utero, yes.
So they would say, yes, I believe that they share equal value, worth, and dignity. Well, how would you feel if a mom brought a 5-year-old boy to a doctor to have the doctor kill the 5-year-old boy?
Right. It's just horrifying.
Of course, it would be horrifying to the nth degree. We couldn't even imagine such a thing. No one would say that's acceptable. Well, if you believe, as the Bible teaches, that the 5-year-old is of equal value, worth, and dignity to the baby in the womb, abortion is the same thing. It's the same moral choice. It's murder, just as killing that 5-year-old would be. And again, the point here is to use the words that need to be used to help believers, first of all, in the church, have clarity about this and courage about this in dealing with both the issues in the culture that then personally the own issues but then personally, the issues in our families.
And let me add to that when you're talking about the culture and then in the church. I remember speaking to a mother's group Bible study. This was a few years ago, and I was talking about the battle for our kids' hearts. And I simply said, I think maybe a couple times, that the battle for our kids' hearts begins at conception, not at birth. Like the battle over our children begins at conception. And I really was just saying it in passing. 2 women came up to me after that talk in tears saying, "Thank you for having the boldness to say that the battle begins at conception." And I was like, oh, I didn't really think that was such a bold comment. But this was in a very prominent Christian church, and here this was a battle. Like, it really did surprise me that even in the church, we have lost this language or understanding that life begins at conception. Because again, I didn't think that was that courageous thing to say in a mom's Bible study.
Well, our prayer team would love to support you if some of this conversation today is personal for you and you've got a prayer need related to an abortion experience in your life or your family. You could email that prayer request to us. We'll get back to you, podcast@visionaryfam.com. We know today's a heavy conversation, but we're going through the 10 Commandments, and we need to deal with each one of these things that God has given us. We would love to be able to see you in person at an upcoming Visionary Family event. Now, we know not everybody can join us for one of these live events. Our time with you on the podcast is our conference time with you. But if you can be with us in person, the D6 Conference, April 22 to 24, Orlando, Florida, the premier national conference on family ministry. The Atlanta Visionary Family Conference, May 17 to 18. The Iowa State Homeschool Conference in June. And then if you're anywhere near the Midwest, join us for an amazing week of family camp, July 19 to 25 at Cedar Bay Conference Center in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Get all the information about those events on our website, visionaryfam.com. Click the events button. As always, please take a moment, leave a review of our podcast, share this conversation with your friends and family, and we look forward to our next time together with you on Family Vision.